Good morning, all. It is the Tuesday morning Bible study. We are up to chapter 39, which means I think we're in session 38 of the overall study. My plan today is for us to actually do two chapters. Some of these chapters at this point are shorter than they have been. And I think it'll be entirely possible for us to do two chapters today. Before we actually get into it, though, I want to share with you a wonderful quote that Sandy, in her telling me that she wouldn't be able to join us today, she also sent me a wonderful Frederick Buechner quote of the day. Frederick Buechner is, of course, a Presbyterian minister and author. He's pretty much every Presbyterian preacher's favorite person to quote because he's just so quotable. But Sandy sent me this, and this is really good, and it's a passage that he wrote about the Bible. It's drawn from his book, The Clown in the Belfry. Speaking of the Bible, he says, it is possible to say that in spite of all its extraordinary variety, the Bible is held together by having a single plot. It is one that can be simply, it is one that can be simply stated. God creates the world gets lost. God seeks to restore the world to the glory for which he created it. That means that the Bible is a book about you and me, whom he also made and lost and continually seeks. So you might say that what holds it together more than anything else is us. You might add to that, of course, that of all the books that humanity has produced, it is the one which more than any other, and in more senses than one, also holds us together. All right, that's a good quote. Okay, so with that, we are in chapter 39. We have, of course, looked last week at chapter 38, the story of Judah and Tamar. And now we're back into the Joseph narrative. And from here to pretty much the end of the book of Genesis, we have a fairly continuous narrative. We don't have, it's not so much in episodes as much as it is a continuous story. All right, so chapter 39, where we left off, of course, is that Joseph has been taken down to Egypt. And at the end of chapter 37, before the episode of Judah and Tamar, we are told that he was sold in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Okay, so with that reminder, we start in chapter 39. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. All right, let's pause there. Things are looking rosy right now. They're about to get unrosy. Let's stick with the rosy just for the moment. Any things you want to lift up out of this first part?
Hey, don't do that.
Well, we know that God is still with Joseph,
Mm-hmm.
despite the fact he got plopped in the pit and all that kind of stuff. So,
That's right. That's right.
so
Absolutely. Yeah. The Lord was with Joseph and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. Yeah.
Well,
What
I
else?
think it's great that Potiphar noticed it. I mean, he was pretty aware of what was going on, that he noticed this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yeah, there was like this aura or something that seems to surround Joseph, that the Joseph just kind of exudes
Mhm.
competence and intelligence and ability. You know, it's very obvious to the people who are around Joseph for any length of time that this is a young man of quality. You know.
And it's a little odd, though, that an Egyptian would notice that the Lord is with Joseph.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's just a different way of saying what you just said, and that
Yeah.
is all of these other things, but that the Lord is with him. I sort of doubt that an Egyptian would do it that way.
Right. No, it's a good point. Good point. Yeah, what else? What else?
whenever you do that, say, what else? What else? We all know, we're missing something. What is
No,
it?
no, not at all. Not at all. There's one thing, there is one extra thing that I will say, but there's no reason why anyone should say it. I mean, there's nothing in the text directly that would do it or would call for it. There's no detail here that you're missing. Let me put it that way. There was one thing I thought of when I was reading this that I thought was interesting, is you know how we've noticed over the last several weeks where there are stories that Jesus tells in the Gospels, parables that he tells, that seem to, it is entirely possible that when Jesus told certain stories that he actually had some of these narratives in his mind, in his heart, as he told his own stories. You know, and I just think of the parables that involve, you know, a master who has servants, and then he entrusts to, you know, like the parable of the talents, for instance, you know, and he entrusts to his servants the management of his whole estate, you know. I mean, it's like a lot of what's that?
That didn't turn out very well.
Yeah, right. Well, it did fine as far as the dude with the 10 talents, you know. It's as though Joseph is a 10 talent guy, you know.
Okay.
You know, it's that he's someone who is a good and faithful servant, so to speak, as Jesus would later call the guy who received the 5 talents and made 5 talents more. And, you know, just this idea of taking what you have been given and making the absolute most of it. And that's what Joseph does. Just exactly what Joseph does. And that's what those in charge of Joseph, the master here, recognizes, that Joseph is worthy of that kind of trust. And yeah, he's worthy of that kind of trust.
It kind of reminds me of the bloom where you're planted.
Yeah,
He definitely is blooming where he's been planted.
Yeah. He really is. He's not, you know, for all the ways in which Joseph is, you know, he's been described earlier as a dreamer. He's actually very grounded in the present. I mean, maybe his previous dreams were his flights of youthful fancy or something. But when he's in this situation, he's not constantly dreaming of, you know, 20 years from now, you know, or free, you know, but he's focused on the here and now. He's focused on what I must do to be to be faithful, to be, most of all, faithful to God. What must I do to be faithful to God, to do the very best that I can, and really trusting in God for the rest of it. That if he gives it his all, that the other things that are outside of his control are going to be managed. And that's not the trait of a dreamer. That's someone who's really grounded, knows who he is, knows who he serves, knows the God that he serves. And so he can give it his all wherever he is. That does not mean, though, that all things are always going to work out for you, as we are going to see in the very next passage. All right, so let's look at the second half of verse 6, and we'll read a little bit. Let's see. Now, Joseph, it doesn't say this in the text, in addition to being really smart and wise, he was handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, Look, with me here, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that she had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Okay, we're going to pause there. Let's pause there. Okay, now there's a lot here. There's a lot going on here. So what reflections do you have on it?
Well, as you've already pointed out, Joseph is stronger than the average 24-year-old male, whatever his age is. So
Right.
that's a good thing, I guess. So,
Yeah.
he's very, very strong of character.
Yes, he is indeed. He is indeed. That's actually, an interesting point along those lines is one thing that some commentators have noticed is the difference between not just the content, not just the moral attitude of Potiphar's wife versus Joseph's moral attitude. It's not just that, but also the number of words they use. Potiphar's wife basically says 3 words. And Joseph, in response, says a lot more than 3 words. Lie with me. Okay. That is most commentators who, especially who are working with the original language, will note how that is, it's not just because Potiphar's wife doesn't have a large vocabulary. It's that it's that she is exerting authority. Okay. She is commanding. When she says lie with me, she's not lie with me. It's more like lie with me. It's more commanding. It's an exertion of her authority as mistress of the household. It is more in the form of command than seduction. It's very blunt. And in response, of course, Joseph kind of gives a little mini oration about why this is a terrible idea, why this is wrong. Not only would I be, breaking the trust of my master, but I would be, breaking trust with God. I'm absolutely not going to do this, that kind of thing.
I can't help but wonder, did the influence of Jacob's love for Rachel have anything to do with how he saw how Joseph might have viewed the situation? Because he knew that his father loved his mother the best or the most. And just wondering if that influenced him in his thinking.
Like I'm not going to lie with a woman I don't love kind of idea. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I hadn't thought of that idea, but that, yeah, I could see that. Could certainly see that. Now, of course, there's, in addition, there's just kind of the whole, master slave thing going on. The whole, Joseph recognizes not only is this, would this be unfaithfulness to God? It would be unfaithfulness to God. It would be unfaithfulness to the master. The master has put me in charge of so much, and by lying with you, I am breaking trust with him. So there's a, and that's partly driven by a sense of honor and duty. It's also, a recognition that he can get in a whole lot of trouble by, if it's found out. If it's found out, then, or if they do it and he tries to keep it secret, she could hold it over him. She could hold that secret over him and blackmail him, or try to blackmail him. And really, and then Joseph would really be her slave. And so, and Joseph recognizes, he has the wisdom to see that is just not a situation I want to get into. There's no commentary here on whether Joseph, just on a, purely biological urge sort of level might have been tempted. There's no commentary on that. But Joseph had the wherewithal to see that everything about this was wrong. Truly everything about this was wrong. And yet she was asserting her authority, lie with me now, you are my servant and you do what I tell you, is the kind of the idea. That's what all the commentators who are using the original Hebrew, that's a point they make, is that this is the bluntness of this, the fact that she actually isn't trying to, woo him into bed with her. The bluntness of what she says to him, that it's that the emphasis here is on her authority.
Despite all of his integrity and strength, though, he still ended up in prison. So
That's right.
you know,
right.
yeah, No good deed goes unpunished.
Can't win for losing. Right.
Oh.
No, exactly. Uh, now, there's really some interesting stuff language wise, and and it's even more true in the Hebrew, but even in the English, we can pick up on things which are present in the original Hebrew that help us to understand just how really do make this passage even more interesting than it may already seem to be. You look at, let's see. Let's see. Here we go. Verse 10. After he has said, how then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. Okay, now that's an interesting little tidbit there. He would not consent to lie beside her or to lie with her. There is one medieval Jewish commentator named Ibn Ezra who sees this as a sign that she, despite the fact that it's not reported that she did this, that she may have altered her message to Joseph as time went on, as Joseph kept refusing her, that she may have altered her messaging rather than, making it purely on the level of command, lie with me, that she may have actually tried to engage in more seductive things, like, for instance, asking Joseph to lie beside her. Okay, like, come on to the bed with me, because for lie with me, is have sex, but what she may have changed her messaging to was just come over here and lie next to me. Not necessarily saying have sex with me, but come over here and lie beside me, with the thought, and again, this would represent a kind of seduction. Come lie beside me, get close to me, feel my heartbeat, feel my warmth, and then with the thought, then you won't be able to resist, that kind of thing. It's not explicit in the text, but as I say, Ibn Ezra reads this and sees a sign of a shift in strategy that Potiphar's wife adopts. Now, of course, then in verse 11 speaks of one day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, lie with me. She's gone back to the command stuff. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Idea that he wasn't wearing much anyway, okay? And that she held on to it, like maybe trying to pull him towards her. And he tries to get away, and he does, but his clothes, most or all of his clothes come off. Okay. And
Well,
that is,
I have to interrupt and say, I think that depends on your whatever translation you have, because my book seems to try to clean things up all the time and calls it a cloak, which you would think would be an outer garment, like a cape or something like that.
Yeah, that is most likely, from what I have read, that is most likely a sanitization of what is occurring here. That while there is a certain parallel to the business about Joseph's cloak being taken from him back with his brothers. In the pit.
Mhm.
That the idea here, this whole passage has sexual innuendo all over the place. Okay, and we'll see it here in just a minute. There's kind of sexual puns and innuendos all over the place. And so the suggestion, the most likely deal, is that this was a garment that was not a cloak. It was not an outer garment. It was actually something that, when pulled away from Joseph, would leave him mostly exposed. Okay. That is certainly a big point that's made by, this is one of the books that I recommended to you if you're interested in following up some, is a translation and commentary by Robert Alter. Robert Alter is a professor of Hebrew and comparative literature at Cal Berkeley. He's a leading Hebrew scholar, and he basically calls out some of the some other Hebrew scholars who want to interpret this scene as saying a cloak, and saying, no, friends, it's not a cloak.
How interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because there are some, not the least of which is E.A. Spicer, who wrote the Genesis commentary in the Anchor Bible series. And he does Spicer does go for a more cloak interpretation to make it more directly parallel with the brothers and the pit account. But Alter's argument is that while there is a superficial connection between those two things, that the sexual innuendo through the rest of this chapter would lead one to believe that when Joseph ran away, he ran away with things looking about as bad as possible for him. That is to say, he's mostly in the buff, mostly, if not all, in the buff, and that Potiphar's wife is left holding all the evidence, and we'll see. And actually, in just a moment, we'll look at what she then says and how she relates what's being said. The fact that Joseph now is he's kind of left with no clothes just adds to the apparent guilt that he has. All right.
I just checked the infallible word of God in King James. And
Oh, very good.
It's garment.
What does the infallible word of God say?
Garment.
Now, having for all of that, and because I go with Robert Alter on this. I have the Spicer commentary as well in my library, and I consulted it too. My considered judgment is that Alter's argument is probably the stronger one, because of what we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Now, for all of that, though, there is a parallel. There is a parallel with the cloak and the pit and the brothers of before. Joseph is stripped of an article of clothing, which leads to either represents or leads to a change in status. Okay. And the change of clothing, or the being stripped of clothing, is then connected to a lie. A lie is told. Okay. So Joseph's cloak is taken from him. He's thrown into a pit. He's sold into slavery. So the cloak, which represents the love that Jacob has for Joseph, the family that Joseph is part of. He is stripped of that. So it's like his identity is stripped. And then it's accompanied by the lie that wild animals must have eaten him, because they put blood, animals' blood, over the cloak and make it like animals ate him. So they have the cloak, they bloody it up, and they tell a lie to Jacob about it. So in the same way, Joseph here has his garment taken away from him, and it is used then in the telling of a lie about what happened, which leads to a change in his status from honored first steward, slave, but honored first steward of the household, to going to prison. Okay. But yeah, it's embarrassing for Joseph. He's left with few, if any, clothes on. All right. He left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Verse 13. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us." Okay, now let me back up real quick. My husband, at least in the New Revised Standard Version, does not represent what's in the original Hebrew. It's my husband. The words "my husband" are included in the New Revised Standard for clarification about who she's talking about. Okay, but in the original Hebrew, it's just he. See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. She's referring to her husband, but in the original Hebrew, it's he brought among. She calls the household and says, he brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. Okay, let's just reflect on that single line. There's a lot here just in this single line. He doesn't say my husband. She doesn't say Potiphar. She says he. Okay, so she is not referring to her husband in a respectful way. She's only indirectly referencing him at all. But she's not using his name or his title. And who is she speaking to?
Servants.
Servants. She's talking to servants.
Mm.
Most, if not all of whom, are Egyptians. Okay, that's important. She's speaking to a bunch of servants, a bunch of people who, in terms of free versus slave, have the same status that Joseph has. Okay, yet they are all Egyptians. See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. Recall the position that Joseph has. He's head of the household. He's steward over the whole household. He's not even an Egyptian. He's not even an Egyptian. Now, then what she's about to do is she's going to say, and this foreigner thinks so much of himself that he can just come in and take his master's wife, right? In essence, what she's saying is he, my husband, but not even naming him, he has put a foreigner over all of you. Okay. So she's disrespecting her husband to begin with, both for what she was trying to do with Joseph and in the way she's referring to the master of the house, to the servants. Okay. She's insulting her husband at the same time, and then disrespects him by saying, and then he put this foreigner over all of you. and no doubt to provoke both sympathy for her and resentment towards both her husband and against Joseph. This woman who doesn't have many words to say, previous in here, actually knows how to use words quite well. She actually is quite good at using words, and she's quite clever. Let's see, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Okay, now let's just pause there for a second. The latter half of verse 14. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. Okay. Now, if just taking that English at face value, he came into me to lie with me. Okay, now on one level.
That's not what mine says.
Okay, what does yours say? What does yours say?
Mine says, he came in here to lie with me.
Okay, yeah.
The way you're saying it, he came into me, is the way they always put the intercourse. And we know what that means. So
That's right.
you're saying a whole lot more than my edited edition here.
And this is, yeah, I was going to say, this is that you are using the sanitized standard version.
Yeah.
By the way, incidentally, what version are you using?
The Oxford Study Edition of the New English Bible.
New English Bible. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I haven't bought a new one yet, but
Okay.
I'm going to have to.
The commentaries that I've seen say that in essence say that the New Revised Standard is preserving the ambiguity of the original Hebrew the best, because in the original Hebrew, there, just as in the translation that I've just related, he came into me to lie with me. Okay.
Awkward. That's an awkward way to put it, though.
It is an awkward way of putting it. It's awkward in the Hebrew also. And that's actually the point, is that it is awkward in the Hebrew. And so it is as though she's planting thoughts. Okay. She's planting thoughts in the minds of the people that she's speaking with of rape.
Mhm.
Without literally saying it. Okay, if that makes sense. He came into me to lie with me. Now we know that on a bare literal level, on a bare literal level, what's being asserted is that he came into the room, right? He came into the room. But the idea of the original Hebrew is that the language is, she's using language in such a way that she's both saying he came into the room, but she's being suggestive. She's being sexually suggestive in even the way she's putting it. You see what I mean? She's being sexually suggestive just in the way she expresses the idea. He came into me to lie with me. You know, she's being sexually suggestive, and that nuance is present in the original Hebrew, and that's what the New Revised Standard is trying to bring out. Okay, so it's like she's planting a worst case scenario without formally charging Joseph with rape. She's planting the idea of rape without actually charging him with it. She's charging him with attempted rape. Literally, she's charging him with attempted rape. But she even uses language in such a way as to suggest that he actually did it, though he didn't. Okay. And so verse 15, and when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story. The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came into me to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Now, insult, she's not saying that he came in and told her that she was ugly. He was not doing, that's not what she's asserting. To insult here, that's probably not the best translation for that word. It actually carries more the sense of humiliate. Okay.
Yeah, and mine would say to make a mockery of me.
There you go. Yeah. And remember what she's already asserted when she was speaking to the other servants. She was in essence saying that this Hebrew is mocking us, insulting us by being put over, or my husband, my husband has insulted us in essence or has made a mockery of things by putting this foreigner over us, or over all of you. And so
that's true. Yeah, I'm looking at the whole sentence is that Hebrew slave whom you brought in to make a mockery of me. So yeah, I didn't get that. So she thinks her husband is responsible for bringing this person in to make a mockery of the rest of the household, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's certainly how she's playing it. Yeah, that's certainly how she's playing it. Well, whether she sincerely believes it is questionable. But
yeah, I think it's just because he wouldn't cooperate, so she's mad at him.
Yeah. No, she's playing her part really well here, and making it as bad as it can possibly be. But she's not just, she really wants to undermine not just Joseph's freedom, but not freedom, because he's not free to begin with, but you know what I mean. She's not only trying to undermine Joseph, but she's trying to undermine her husband at the same time.
I think she doesn't want him just to be mad about it, but she wants Potiphar to really feel bad about it. She wants him to feel bad about himself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's really, she's milking this for all it's worth. I mean, she's really getting everything she can out of this. And so let's see. The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to insult me, to humiliate me. Okay. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. And now the idea is that he's outside, and he's got few, if any, clothes on. It just looks really embarrassing. It looks really bad for Joseph. Verse 19. When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Wow. Yeah. Okay, so he's in prison, and even in prison, he is noticed. He's noticed for his character, his wisdom, his abilities. And he's, though a prisoner, has been put in charge of things. It's like he can't go anywhere without people recognizing his superiority, recognizing his gifts and abilities and whatnot. And so it is said that the Lord blesses him. Let's actually push forward just a little bit and go into chapter 40, because this very much continues this theme. Now, sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he waited on them, and they continued for some time in custody. Let me just pause here and say what probably some of the key words here is that very first line of chapter 40. Sometime after this. It doesn't say how long, how much time. It just says sometime after this. Joseph is still in confinement. But notice how it speaks. It kind of goes back and forth between him being in prison, speaking of the word prison, and saying that he was in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. Now here, this is kind of interesting, because as far as we know, the captain of the guard is Potiphar. Potiphar has at least twice has been referred to explicitly as the captain of the guard. And so it may well be, and it may not be this way, but there's nothing to contradict it either. But it's almost as though Joseph is in a kind of house arrest. But apparently others are so confined in a similar way. Okay, let's see. Verse 4. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, okay, the cupbearer and the baker. And he waited on them, and they continued for some time in custody. One night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house. Why are your faces downcast today? And they said to him, we have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you. Please do me the kindness to make mention of me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this place. For in fact, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. Then the chief baker saw that the interpretation or when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Oh, that's great. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay.
So where is Joseph? Is he in the dungeon or is he in the house of the captain of the guard?
It's kind of both. It's like he's in a kind of house arrest. There's ambiguity here. We don't really know.
My interpretation keeps calling it the round tower. He's put into the round tower, and they refer to that several times in that stuff you were
The
reading.
round tower.
Uh-huh.
I'll have to look into that.
So it says they put him in the round tower where the king's prisoners were kept, and that's where he stayed. So,
Yeah.
But it does sort of sound like it must be attached to the house somehow.
Yeah,
It doesn't talk about in the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah. It may be that the prison, that the captain of the guard, just by his job description, has some responsibility for the prisoners of the king. And so there is like a prison that's attached to his house. And that could well be the source of the ambiguity here. But as we know, once again, Joseph has been recognized. He's put in he's still a prisoner, but he's sort of put in charge of making sure that the cupbearer and the baker, who are, they're high level prisoners. They're not going to be, thrown into a dungeon in stocks, or something like that. They're going to be treated with some measure of dignity. And there's at least the possibility that the king is going to change his mind. The king is going to change his mind and is going to let them out.
And if this is Potiphar, the captain of the guard,
right?
Is there any explanation for this dramatic change of attitude other than the grace of God? I guess.
Yeah, there's not. There's not.
Yeah,
there's not.
It sounds kind of strange to me.
It does. And
It would be
again,
so forgiving.
the only thing that I can really, the only sense I can make of it is that those words sometime after this, at the beginning of chapter 40, that sometime after this, so it sounds like, a little time has passed. Maybe it's not quite so, not quite so fresh on the mind. Maybe Potiphar has, as far as we know, it doesn't say this in the text. So
retired. He retired. He was an old guy. That's why.
Yeah, maybe he's. Yeah.
That's where. Yeah.
or maybe well, maybe he didn't. He wakes up and doesn't appreciate the fact that, or maybe gets wind of how his wife had basically undermined his household authority by speaking of him in the way that she did. Maybe he had no proof that she was lying, but at the same time, it's possible that in his mind, she may have overplayed her hand too. But it's not in the text, so we don't really know.
We don't know why he hung the baker either.
Well, right, yeah, and then we don't know. Yeah, we don't know what offended Pharaoh. We don't know what the Pharaoh was upset about.
I have a question about this, the word eunuch, because in my interpretation, Potiphar is called a eunuch, and then these 2 that get thrown into prison here are also called 2 eunuchs. And I always thought that eunuchs were like castrated people. Obviously, Potiphar has a wife, so Is there another
Is,
interpretation of the word eunuch?
where does that word appear in your translation? Like a verse?
Okay, well, way back in 39, when it starts off, it says,
All right.
Joseph was bought by Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's eunuchs.
Hmm.
And then in 40,
I'm just
it
curious.
says that the king's butler and his baker offended their master, the king, and Pharaoh was angry with these two eunuchs.
Hmm.
So I don't
That's
know.
interesting. I'll check that out. I don't have a good answer for you right now. I'll have to check that out.
Isn't the usual translation that they were castrated people
Yes.
who worked for the kings or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah, that would be the ordinary meaning of it. So, which does naturally lead to what's going on here.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's just a
Christ's
bad
pants.
translation or what. I'll have to look into that. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was one of the reasons why the wife wanted to lie with Joseph.
Could be.
It's been a long time.
They couldn't have children.
Right.
So, yeah.
Just an interesting idea. I'm gonna have to look that up. My studies did not prepare me for that revelation, so I'm gonna have to look that up.
We would have more sympathy for the wife if it had said
Yeah,
in there,
fair enough.
well, she was
Yeah.
barren because blah, 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 and really wanted children. And so she was trying to get, I like that idea, Carol.
That's an interesting idea. It really is.
It doesn't say that in my Bible. So.
I will check that out. I have resources that I can consult that will likely give me the answer that I'm seeking. I'll let y'all know next week what I came up with.
Well, is that source that she's got, is that like the Living Bible? Is it an interpretation or is it?
No, it's
Mine? No, it's the New English.
Translation.
the New English. Yeah.
And mine is
With the
too.
Apocrypha.
Yeah, there are plenty of goofy translations out there, but the New
Yeah.
English Bible is not one of them. There are goofy translations out there, but New English is a very respected version. So, I mean, if you were reading me the Living Bible and the Living Bible said eunuch, I'd be like, well, maybe you ought to get a new Bible.
Yeah, me too.
But but no, the New English is a perfectly respectable translation. So it makes me wonder what's going on there. So I'll look that up. It's obviously these the fates of these two are very different. Joseph, when Joseph says, tell me the dreams, up till now, Joseph's been one who dreams, not someone who interprets dreams. Now, dream interpretation was, in this world of Egypt, dream interpretation was associated with the priestly class. It was associated with priests and with astrologers and that sort of thing. And so when Joseph comes along and says, these interpretations belong to God, he's saying two things. First, he's saying that they are not the province of these professional dream interpreters. They are the province of God. Secondly, and he doesn't say this explicitly, but it's implicit, because they are the province of God, you can tell me because I am led by God. I am in touch with God.
Mhm.
You can tell me, they do belong to God, but I am in touch with God. God is going to, Joseph is basically saying, I trust that God is going to give me the interpretation. And so, so it's both maybe a combination of confidence on Joseph's part, but a confidence in God, a trust in God that God is going to reveal to him the interpretation that he then can relay to the cupbearer and to the baker. Again, the two dreams are outwardly similar and yet have radically different interpretation, have radically different implications. Both involve using the metaphor of lifting up one's head. Okay, except in one case it is figurative, and in the other case it is literal. And of course, in the cupbearer's case, it is figurative. It's a dream that, when interpreted, means that that Pharaoh is going to lift him up. He is going to restore him to his previous position. Whereas in the baker's case, it is an all too literal description. Now, sometimes I'll use the New Revised Standard, and I'll suggest, without maybe saying it directly, I'll sometimes suggest that the New Revised Standard is always the best translation, but it's not. It's not. Sometimes the NRSV brings things out in the original Hebrew that are, I think, important, and it reveals itself to be a good translation in a particular instance. But then other times it really kind of doesn't. And we get that in what happens to the baker, where it says in verse 20, on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer. That's good. And the head of the chief baker. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing. That's the figurative meaning of lifting up his head. And he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker, it says, he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Okay. In the NRSV, it sounds like he was hanged. What does the New English Bible say there?
I think pretty much the same thing. He restored the chief butler to his post, and the butler put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker.
Yeah.
And that's all it says.
Yeah. In the if you look at back at verse 19, where it says, within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. The original Hebrew gives a clue to what actually is happening here. And it's both the original Hebrew that gives a hint, but it's also what historians and archaeologists know about punishment customs in ancient Egypt. Hanging in the hanging sense, hanging was not a punishment that ancient Egypt doled out. Okay, it was not a way you were executed. And so the Hebrew hint in verse 19, lifting up your head from you, head goes off. And then something that the Egyptians didn't do a lot, and this actually came out in a movie that I was watching, and as soon as it happened, I switched the channel because it was awful. It was that the Egyptians were into impalement. You know what impalement is? Well, we won't describe it, but you know what impalement is. And so what actually seemed a combination of the hint that the Hebrew gives together with what archaeologists and historians know about punishment customs in ancient Egypt, what seemed to have happened is that the baker's head was lopped off and that his body was impaled on a pole and put out in kind of a Tower of London sort of, or a London Bridge sort of way, as a deterrent to malefactors. And hence the part about the birds and all that stuff. And so really, it's a really quite awful and grisly ending, far worse actually than just a good old fashioned straightforward hanging. So
probably because the baker served him zucchini muffins, and I think it's justifiable if that's the case. I feel the same way.
yeah, I was gonna say, I can't feel sorry for that baker. He had it coming to him.
Well, it's interesting also that Joseph tells the cupbearer to put in a good word for him.
Yes.
He doesn't tell the baker to put in a good word for him. He doesn't
Yeah.
want the baker talking about him, I guess.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. He doesn't want to, he wants to get as far away from this baker as he can, right?
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I noticed
Uh-huh.
in verse in 4, of course, in chapter 40, in the second part of verse 8,
Yeah.
that Joseph makes it clear that he's not interpreting the dream, that God's interpreting the
Right.
dream.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, he does. You're absolutely right. He is, he says that that these interpretations belong to God. What he is setting himself up as, in a sense, is one who can relate what God's will is, what God's interpretation is. That he knows that, or he can hear that. Looks like we lost Carol, but we were about to wrap up anyway. But so this is going to set up a couple of interesting things. Joseph is going to be interpreting somebody else's dream here next week, or if we meet next week. He'll be interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, which turns out to be highly significant. But also, there's also the fact that the cupbearer does forget. He does forget to tell Pharaoh about Joseph, even though Joseph had said, "Hey, remember me when you're free and you're talking with the Pharaoh." He forgets, although he's going to remember a little later. The cupbearer is. He's going to remember a little later. This is going to be a theme that gets replayed in the rest of this narrative, because this whole theme of forgetting and remembering, the brothers will have forgotten all kinds of things, and later they're going to remember, and it's going to be quite dramatic. All right. Next week, are y'all good for gathering on Tuesday morning, or?
I would be, yeah.
Okay.
I would.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, good. We'll do it then. We'll be in chapter 41 then next week. Let's close with a brief prayer, and I know we've ran a little over time, so we'll do a brief prayer and then we'll go. Oh God, we give you thanks for this day and for this opportunity to gather as we do each week. We thank you for these stories, for this extended narrative, which, as Frederick Buechner says, is really an extended narrative of us. It's an extended story of your dealings with our human race, of which we are a part, and God's working through the mess of human life to bring us to redemption. And so we thank you for this. We pray for all who couldn't join us today. We pray that they are well and that you are working in their lives for grace and good. We pray now, as we go from this place, that you will give us a great rest of the day, filled with beauty and grace. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. All right, y'all. Well, have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you next week.
Aye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Hey.